Good Governance, Chapter 5, will tackle about business ethics and ethical decision making. Now, the definition of social responsibility that appears in Chapter 1 incorporates society's expectation and includes four levels of concern. So, what are these concerns? The economic, the legal, the ethical, and the philanthropic. Now, because ethics is becoming increasingly important in an issue in the business today, this chapter and the succeeding chapters are devoted to exploring uh, this dimension of social responsibility. Okay, first, we define business ethics, examine its importance from an organizational perspective, and review its foundation even. Next, we will define ethical issues in business to help understand areas of risk. We then look at the individual, organizational, and opportunity factors that influence ethical decision making in the workplace. Now, we proceed with the nature of business ethics. So before we proceed with the ethics issues, we now try to define what is ethics in our perspective. Okay, ethics relates to choices and judgments about acceptable standards of conduct that guide the behavior of individual and groups. Now, in business ethics comprises the principles and standards that guides the behavior of individuals and groups in the world of business. Now, in the world of business, maintaining a balance between a company's desire for profits and society's wishes and needs often demand compromises or trade-offs. So it's almost more or less a lot of things happens and it is present, the trading offs. Now, it is necessary to examine business ethics to understand decisions made in the context of an organizational culture. Now, it is vital to recognize that business ethics goes beyond even the boundaries of the legal issues. And some business people choose to behave ethically because of the enlightenment or the enlightened self-interest or the expectation that the ethics says, what ethics says actually or dictates, and that ethics pays. So there's a certain degree of belief in that ethics pays. Okay. Now, first we try to assess the foundations of business ethics. Now, because it is difficult to draw a boundary between legal and ethical issues, all questionable issues need an organizational mechanism for resolution. Now, the legal ramification of some issues and situations may be obvious, but more often, the questionable decisions and actions result in disputes that must be resolved through some type of negotiation or even litigation. Now, to avoid the cost of litigation, companies should develop systems to monitor complaints, to adhere to suggestions, and other feedback from the stakeholders. Now, the identification of ethical issues and the implementation of the standards of conduct that incorporate both the legal and the ethical concerns comprise the best approach to preventing crime and avoiding civil litigation. Now, although some ethical standards are assumed to be self-evident, both employees and managers need experience within a specific industry to understand how to operate in gray areas or to handle close calls in evolving areas such as the internet privacy, which is are now prevailing right now. Now, many people who have limited business experience suddenly they find themselves making important business-related decisions. Now, the personal values they learn through non-work socialization or from family, from our respective religions, the schools, may not provide the specific guidelines for these complex business decisions. And um, it is important that a shared vision of acceptable behavior develop from an organizational perspective to cultivate a consistent and reliable relationship with all concerned stakeholders despite differences in the personal values. Now, business ethics should relate to work environment, and decisions should not control or influence personal ethical issues. Now, the ethical issues in business will involve, uh, for example, an ethical issue is a problem. It's a situation or an opportunity requiring an individual or a group or organization to choose among several actions that must be evaluated as right or wrong, ethical or unethical. So there's this kind of dilemma sometimes. Now, abusive or intimidating behavior can mean anything from physical threats, false accusations, annoying a co-worker, profanity, insults, shouting or yelling, harshness, and ignoring someone, ignoring someone to being unreasonable, or the meaning of this word can differ by person. So it depends. Now, lying. Lying relates to distorting the truth. Now, there are three general types of lies. First, a so-called white lie is usually told to avoid hurting someone's feelings. Second, lying by commission is creating a perception of belief by words that intentionally deceive the receiver of the message. Okay? Now, third is lying by omission. That is intentionally not informing the receiver of material facts. Okay, so that is lying. Okay, so white lie for lying, and then commission, lying by commission, and lying by omission. So three. No, there's three general types of lies. Now, next is the conflict of interest exists when an individual must choose whether to advance his or her own interest, fraud, uh, uh, own interest, those of or those of some of the other group. Okay. Now, in general, fraud is another thing. No? When you say fraud, is any false communication that deceives, manipulates, or conceal facts in order to create false impression. Impression by which others are damaged or denied a benefit. You could just see, the effects of it. Now, despite the standard to provide a strict code of ethics, the accounting industry has been the source of numerous fraud investigations in recent years. Now, communications that are false or misleading or marketing fraud can destroy customers' trust in the organization. And then at the same time, consumer fraud is also a concern. Okay, so that's false impression on occasion. Next is the discrimination. Discrimination remains a significant and critical ethical issues in business despite nearly 40 years of legislation to outlaw discrimination. Okay. Affirmative action programs include efforts to recruit, to hire, to train, and promote qualified individuals from groups that have traditionally been discriminated against on the basis of race, their gender, or other characteristics. Okay, now the final category of ethical issues relates to technology. Technology and the numerous advances made in the internet and in other forms of electronic communication in the last few decades. Now, it can be difficult to recognize specific ethical issues in practice, and it is understandable. Now, how do we consider and understand the ethical decision-making process? So, number one is the individual factors. So, what happens there? Moral philosophies. Philosophies are principles or rules that individuals apply in deciding what is right and what is wrong. Now, consequentialism. Consequentialism is a class of moral philosophy that considers a decision right or acceptable if it accomplishes rather a desired result such as pleasure, knowledge, career growth, the realization of self-interest, or utility. Okay? Now, under consequentialism is the egoism. Egoism is one form of consequentialism. It is a philosophy that defines right or acceptable conduct in terms of consequences for individual. Now, in a decision-making situation, the egoist will probably choose the alternative that most benefits his or her self-interest. Now, next is the utilitarianism. It is another consequentialist philosophy that is concerned with consequences. But utilitarians seek the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Okay, so using a cost-benefit analysis, a utilitarian decision maker calculates the utility of the consequences of all possible alternatives, and then chooses the one that achieves the greatest utility. Okay. Now, in contrast with the consequentialism is the ethical formalism. The ethical formalism is a class of moral philosophy that focuses on the rights of the individuals and on the intentions associated with a particular behavior rather than on its consequences. Okay? Now, the ethical formalist regards certain behaviors as inherently right, and their determination of rightness focuses on the individual actor, not on the society as a whole. Now, unlike utilitarians, ethical formalists contend that there are some things that people should not do, or even to maximize utility. Now, justice theory is a class of moral philosophy that relates to evaluation of fairness or the disposition to deal with perceived injustices of others. Now, justice demands fair treatment and due reward in accordance with the ethical or legal standards. There are three types of justice that can be used to assess fairness in different situations. Now, what are these types of justice? Types of justice. Okay, number one is distributive justice. In the distributive justice, it evaluates the outcomes or results of a business relationship. For example, if an employee feels that she is being paid less than her co-workers, and for the same work, she has concern about distributive justice. Okay. Then next is the procedural justice. A procedural justice assesses the processes and activities employed to produce an outcome or result. Procedural justice in terms of compensation would relate to the perception that salary and benefit decisions were consistent and fair to all categories of employees. So that is procedural justice. Now, interactional justice. In the interactional justice, it evaluates the communication processes and use in the business relationship. Now, being untruthful about the reasons for missing work is an example of an interactional justice issue. Okay? So, these are the three types of justice. One reason that different people make different decision when confronted with similar ethical situations may be that they are different in stages of moral development, and that is a concept based on the theory of Kohlberg. And these stages include the following: punishment and obedience, individual, instrumental purpose and exchange, mutual, interpersonal expectation, relationship, and conformity is another. And then social justice and conscience maintenance. And then prior rights, social contract or utility is another. And lastly, the universal ethical principles. Now, in the Kohlberg theory, suggests that people may change their moral beliefs and behavior as they gain education and experience in resolving conflicts, which help accelerate their progress along the moral development continuum. Now, Kohlberg's model also suggests that there are universal values by which people in the highest level of moral development abide and follow. Now, the organizational relationship. Ethical workers on business are most often made jointly in committees and work groups or in the conversation with co-workers. Now, the organizational or corporate culture can be defined as a set of values, beliefs, goals, norms, rituals that is shared by members or employees of an organization. Now, culture is both conveyed formality and expressed informally. Okay, culture is both conveyed formally and expressed informally, no, rather. Now, ethical climate is the part of a corporate culture that relates to an organization's expectations about appropriate conduct. Okay, and then significant others include superiors, peers, and subordinates in the organization who influence the ethical decision-making process. Okay, so that you consider all those persons. Now, most experts agree that the chief executive officer establishes the ethical tone for the entire firm because he's the decision maker. And then most business people take their cues from or learn from co-workers about how to solve problems, including the ethical dilemmas. Now, superiors and co-workers can create organizational pressure, which plays a key role in creating ethical issues. Now, when you say opportunity is a set of conditions that limit barriers or provide rewards. Together, organizational culture and the influence of co-workers may foster conditions that hinder or permit misconduct. And opportunity usually relates to employees' immediate job context, where they work, with whom they work, and the nature of the work. Okay? And this comprises the rewards or positive reinforcers that include pay raises, that include bonuses, and public recognition. And reprimands, however, pay penalties, or demotions, and even firings as an act of negative reinforcers. Now, opportunity to engage in unethical conduct is often a better predictor of unethical activities than a personal values. Okay? So, that is chapter 5 of the good governance discussion in our subject. So, I hope that you've learned from our discussion in the business ethics and the ethical decision making of chapter 5. Thank you.
Do you want to know?